Alright, hello everyone. We are back today to do our registration list animation using Tahoma2D. So first up, always make sure that you have a project selected that's not the sandbox. I'm just going to continue using the same project, but you can always make a new one if you prefer, and just some sort of descriptive name. And create scene. Alright, first up I need to import my image, so right click, load level. I know that my image is in the downloads folder, and it is this one right here. So I'm going to load, and I always import so it's inside the project. I've been experimenting previously, so my file's actually already imported. So I'm just going to use that option, and there we go. Now, before I start making any changes, I want to change one of my preferences. So I'm going to come up to Tahoma2D in the menu, Preferences, and under Animation. For you, it'll say linear, and you want to make sure that you change that to constant. So interpolation is the type of transition between the different keyframes or the different states that we create using the animate tool. So linear is a really steady transition. Constant is going to stay one way until it completely changes to something else. So no transition, it's either one thing or it's the next. And that's what we want in this case. So I'm just going to close out of that. And I'm going to switch over to the animate tool, and I'm going to change my mode to center, and there's this little pink center. Should have chosen a different background color, and I'm just going to move it to the beginning of my animation, which is this circle up here at the top. And I'm going to now change my position and line that circle up in the very center of the camera, which you can identify by the little red X. And now, because I have the center set, when I change the scale, my circle is going to stay right in the middle. So perhaps something like that. Something that can be helpful is changing the view of the camera. So this third option over here shows you just the view in the camera, and I can see more or less of what's outside of the camera depending on what's helpful. So something like this should be good. And now I'm ready to start animating. So I'm going to head over maybe every third frame. So I'm just going to click over here on frame 4, and I'm going to change my mode to position. And I'm just going to line up the next drawing in the middle. So if I hold down on Shift, it'll keep this locked really precise and straight, depending on what makes sense visually. Maybe I don't want it completely instead. Maybe I want to adjust the position a little bit. So do what makes sense in your particular case. Shift if you want to keep it super precise. Sometimes I'll be changing the direction. All right, and I think that is the end. Now, I'm going to do a little bit more animating, but I'm just going to add a stop frame hold for a moment. I'm probably going to change the location later on, but one way I can do that is right-click, stop frame hold, and that updates the playback range to be the area that I want to look at. So I'm going to change the opacity all the way up and play through and see how this is looking. That's working pretty well, perhaps a little fast. I can play around with the frame rate. Recommend not going any lower than 12, and keep in mind changing it directly here in the viewer is just for testing different options and to be able to see your animation more clearly. If that's the actual rate that I want to keep it at, I do need to change it in scene settings later on. So I'm just going to play around with some different options until I have something that I think is the speed that I want to go with. So something like that I think might look good. So I might come over here and change my final frame rate to what I actually want it to be in the scene settings. And I'm going to remove this stop hold for now. So I'm just going to click on that and delete it. And I'm going to add a transition from my last frame here to zoom out and show the entire animation. Before I do that, I want to change in preferences my interpolation mode under animation back to linear. Though I guess you could experiment with the other options if you wanted to. So I just want a steady transition to reveal the rest of my image. So I'm going to come over to 3 frames out, so 85, and I'm just going to add a keyframe to the position as is. And because this is a solid color, I know that that is going to be setting a keyframe for all of my different data properties. If it was half filled, that would mean it's ending up giving you a keyframe just for a particular type of data, not for all of the different modes. And I want that to be set for both of them. So I could always manually change the scale and click on the keyframe icon as well if it didn't look right, but in my case I didn't actually need to do that. But I do need to be using scale. So I'm going to set that, going to lower the opacity again so that I can see more of my image. And I'm going to zoom out. And there's this little pink circle here that shows me where the actual center of my image is. I'm going to go back to center, and I'm going to move the center pivot point to that location. All right, so I have this keyframe keeping that particular image visible for a few frames. So now I have to decide how long I want my transition to be. I'm going to go to frame 100 and we'll see how that looks. I can always adjust if I'm not satisfied. I'm going to go over to position, and I'm just going to line up the center of the image with the center of the camera. Again, pink background was a bad choice as far as that goes, but that should work pretty well. And now I'm going to go back to scale. And I am going to just zoom out to show as much of my image as I can. I guess I probably don't want to leave a white edge being visible, so I have a few options in terms of what to do to prevent that. I could leave this zoomed in a little bit more so that it's cutting off part of my image. Actually, let's up the opacity and play through like that and see how that ends up looking. So just going back to the start, playing through, and it's not updating that final playback the way that I want it to. So I'm just going to add that stop frame hold. You can see that that's going to have a big impact on what actually remains visible. All right, and at the point where I have my zoom, I'm probably going to have that last for a while. So I want to decide how long I want it to last for, like if it lasts for a second, if it lasts for more. Let's play through. All right, so something like that works well. Now, depending on how much extra margin you gave yourself around your drawing, you may or may not have this problem that I have, where there are parts of the animation where you end up just with this white gap. Maybe it's subtle because you have white paper, maybe it's super obvious like mine. So I'm going to just insert below, and I am going to copy with Command C and paste with Command V my image here. And I am just going to play around with, get a little bit zoomed in. I think I want to find the first area where this happened. So I think over here is my first occurrence. And I'm just going to grab the animate tool. I'm going to be changing the position, and I'm going to be changing the scale want to get this with the same level of zoom, or at least to a level where it's not really noticeable. So something pretty cool I can do, I can come over to timing, and we have on the left we have this little file tree which shows us anything that has keyframes and is animated. Sometimes if you right click you can show animated only, and so that can be helpful. But at the beginning I have show animated only, I have some other things animated. So 606.5 was the initial scale. So if I set this scale to 606.5, that should give me an image that's the same level of zoom compared to before. So I'm just going to switch back into the camera view. There might be a little bit of a seam, but it's much more subtle. I'm just going to switch the position, play around with what area, depending on what I think makes sense. And I'm just going to scrub through just by clicking and dragging. And so we can see there's this point over here where it's showing some things that I probably don't want to see. So I'm going to put my interpolation back to constant. And I'm just going to slide this around. And I just want to see if I can find an area that's looking, yeah, so there's still a little bit of a seam there, but it is pretty subtle, not necessarily super obvious. So I can play through, look out for any areas where it's not doing what it should. And actually, now that I have that there on the other layer, I can experiment with potentially scaling this down even further to show more of the image. All right. So at this point, I just want to make sure that the playback is the speed that I want, that everything is showing exactly the way that I want it to, and everything is lasting for the amount of time that I want it to last. I feel like I might want to hold this a little longer at the end so that it stays visible on that zoomed out view. Maybe that's actually a little bit too far, so I might just drag this back, and I can experiment until I'm done. Just a reminder, save regularly, so Command S to save, or File Save All, and you can either do a fast render to MP4 unless you want another format, and you can head over into the output settings for that. And that is it for today.